Okay, so today is the 12th of June 2016, and this video is a kind of follow-on from last week's video about how to read for yourself. Because I mentioned last week that when you're reading for yourself and you turn a card, the first thing you do is you do not look up what the card is supposed to mean, but instead you work with what you know and you see what sense you can make of that particular card for that particular question. And the comment I received was, if we're supposed to rely on ourselves and our own interpretation of the card, what's the point of reading books, right? And researching symbols and symbolism and numbers and so on in order to add to our understanding so we can make more sense of the card. And this is what I'd like to consider today. So first, this idea of not looking at meanings in books or referring to blogs and so on, this is for when you're reading for yourself. And I think that when you're reading for yourself and you try to incorporate other people's findings or ideas, it's going to get you off track. So you end up confused and stuck. So if you're reading for yourself, read for yourself. You know, it's a bit like reading Shakespeare or some poem in English. Originally, it was written in English. But if you're going to read Shakespeare, you read it in English. You don't read the French or the German translation and expect to get more out of the original, I think. So if you have a picture of a heart with 3 swords through it and clouds and rain in the background, you consider what this picture is about. You look at it and figure out what's going on, what it's about. That's not the same as figuring out what that picture means to you, generally or specifically. It's more like you look and see what's going on in the picture, and then you think about how does what's going on in the picture relate to the question. Because if you go with what it means to you, so that's through your swords with the heart and so on, you might think that suffering is good and that God is punishing you and we only get what we deserve. So the sorrow of the 3 of Swords is a good thing, right? And that's a fair enough example of somebody's personal take or interpretation of the card. But if you're stuck in a happy relationship or you're looking for love and you get the 3 of Swords, being told that you're getting what you deserve and that God's punishing you isn't that helpful when what you want to know is how can I have a good relationship? So that idea that God is punishing you, that can be part of the reader's state of mind or the reader's understanding, but somehow is not universally correct or applicable, right? It's too personal. It's too specific to that individual. And so you can't, or if you take a very specific interpretation and try to make it general, I think that's asking for trouble. On the other hand, if you're doing a reading for somebody else, then if you think about it, it's no longer just you and a card like it is when it's you reading for you. It's you, the card, and the questioner. So it's like there are 3 people involved, or three of you involved. And in a situation like that, people will often recommend that we read intuitively, right? But if you've seen it in previous videos, you know that I take a different approach. Because I've found that people being intuitive, or what they call being intuitive, they can easily get carried away with themselves. And it's a bit like, I remember seeing psychics on television and somebody would ask about a departed loved one and the psychic would say, yes, you know, he loves you and he's sorry, he misses you, and giving advice apparently from the dead, and the psychic giving words that the dead person is apparently speaking. And it may be comforting for the questioner to hear this, but I think it's a bit far-fetched. And you also can't prove it, and it's just somebody's statement. And I think that's what can happen with tarot readings that are just intuitive. You've got the reader talking and explaining things, but it may have absolutely nothing to do with the cards that have been chosen. And in another video, I think it's another video, I gave an example of a woman whose father was going on a camping trip, right, with 2 or 3 friends, and he was wondering how the other people would get along with him. So the reader picked a card and got the King of Swords and started talking about how the questioner's father is a fine, upstanding citizen because he's the King of Swords, and then picks another card and does this sort of off-the-cuff reading. But the thing is, that King of Swords could be describing the other person, the father's friend, who was a bit of a problem, right? And so the King of Swords could represent the father, but it could represent somebody you don't argue with, right? Somebody you defer to just because it saves trouble. So you let somebody loud and noisy and aggressive have their own way because it's too much trouble to argue with them, right? So that King of Swords could be describing the difficult friend, but it could also be describing what the camping trip was going to be about, because it's a king, right? So the problem with the trip can be who's going to have the final say, who's going to make the decision about where they go and what they do on any particular day at any particular time. And that can be what the King of Swords can represent. So with the intuitive method, you can turn a card and talk, but you can get way off track, and it's easy to be wrong. So instead of having to wonder if what you're saying is right, take your lead from the card's picture, and I think you won't go wrong. So Anne it was who asked about why bother reading and researching if we're just using our own ideas. And her question got me wondering, and I came up with this. Okay, you have to go back and think about when you were in high school and you learned some branch of mathematics. And I'm going to use the example of algebra, but it could be geometry or calculus or some other area of mathematics. So there's a diagram on screen. The small circle is you, right? And the shaded part is your knowledge of algebra, and your knowledge of algebra intersects with the big circle that represents all of algebra. So you know some algebra, and you know that you can learn more of it, though you probably are not going to keep going until you learn all of algebra. But you can easily accept there's more to learn than you already know. And you don't mind this. You don't mind that your knowledge is limited in the beginning, and you don't mind knowing only part of the whole of algebra. Or let's say you're dealing with a question about relationships. So the small circle is what you know or understand about relationships, and the big circle is everything there is to know about relationships. And there's an intersection. So I think you can get the idea of what I'm aiming for here. So if we consider the tarot, then the small circle is maybe your understanding of the tarot, and the big circle is all understanding of the tarot, right? And so where they intersect is the place of books, blogs, videos, podcasts, and so on that are about, or that claim to be about the tarot. So I'm saying claim to be about because some of what's in the intersection will be wrong. So some stuff you read about the tarot is just not correct, or it's misguided, or it's not quite right. That's okay though, because somebody once told me, you can learn as much from a bad book as you can from a good one. So with that in mind, it's a good idea when we're reading books or blog posts, or when we're studying, that we don't just accept what's written, but we remember to exercise judgment as well and think it through. So if somebody says something, don't try and memorize it or accept it without thinking, but ask yourself if what's being said makes sense or not. And if it doesn't make sense, you figure out why not. Or if you're not sure, you think more about, okay, is it sensible? Does it make sense? Is it realistic? Is it a good thought to have or a good meaning to relate to this particular card? Remembering that in the beginning, you're sort of going to feel dependent on the book. In the beginning of our studies, we we're automatically looking for some knowledgeable source so that we can feel comfortable and confident in the interpretation that we give. But it's important to think things through. So with algebra, to go back to algebra, you know that you know something about algebra, and you know that there's more to learn, but you accept that there's more to learn, and you don't really mind that you don't know everything. But with the tarot and with the occult generally, so with numbers and astrology, for instance, people know logically that they don't know everything about these subjects, but they talk and they act like as if they do, right? They talk like they know everything, or they talk as if they're always on track when it comes to giving an interpretation, or when they're always that they seem to think they're always on the right track, even if they're not. And this is something we have to watch out for. So that King of Swords I mentioned earlier was apparently describing only the father, and the reader could see only that, but it could have been other things as well. So we accept our limited understanding when it comes to algebra, but not so much with the tarot. And even if it's kind of, it can also be that we think we ought to know everything when it comes to the tarot. And that can be why we're hard on ourselves, or why we think that the readings we do aren't very good. Right, but, okay, this comes in part from our condition in the beginning of our studies. And I need to show you a couple of photographs of glass vases. So the first one is a vase, an orange vase by a fellow called Jim Mongrian. And so my son David used to blow glass. He used to make glass. And one of the first exercises he was given in class was they had to find a shape they liked, and they had to duplicate it as best they could. Right. So this blue photograph of the blue vase is David's first attempt to replicate the orange vase that you saw a moment ago. So he tried it, and it's not very good. He ended up, I mean, he made much better glass than this. But so the thing is, the reason I'm showing you this is because the orange vase, David was trying to make it from one piece of glass. It's called a gather. You gather some glass and then you blow and you shape it. But the thing is, the orange vase wasn't made from one piece of glass. It was made from three that were joined together. So David was trying to duplicate something made from three bits and joined together from one single piece of glass, and it couldn't be done. So you basically can't do it. So with the tarot or other related subjects, in the beginning you discover something and you understand it as best you can, or you understand it based on your current amount of knowledge. But that amount of knowledge is incomplete, or it's limited. So the new knowledge that you think you've got, or the new interpretation that you develop, it's going to be limited as well, or it's going to be flawed, or it's going to be incomplete. But people act as if it's complete, or as if they have perfect understanding. In the same way that David tried to duplicate something that couldn't be done, but he did the best that he could at the time based on his current understanding and current knowledge. But if we remember that, especially in the beginning, what we understand is incomplete because we absorb it into an incomplete understanding in the first place. And if you remember that, it's kind of protection, and we don't get carried away to the same extent with our intuition, and we don't get into the same amount of trouble. So this last diagram is a circle within a circle, and maybe this is a more correct description of what's going on. So the circle in the middle is you and me, it's us, and the outer circle is everything. So this circle inside a circle can indicate that we have access to all understanding. We have access to it, but we don't have conscious understanding of everything all the time. But when we think that we do, that's when our ego is controlling us and it gets in the way. So how do we proceed with the tarot or with any subject of study? Perhaps what we do is we don't try to make this circle of understanding bigger, the one in the middle, but instead we make it more dense or more concentrated. Okay, that's a kind of weak ending, but I'll probably come back to it. But let me leave it at that for the moment. So if you have comments or questions, let me know. I'll be posting something new next week. I think it's going to be about the Celtic Cross, but I'm not sure. And something can come up in the meantime. So that's it for the moment. Have a good week, and we'll see you again. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.